Okay, I believe we're live for the latest edition of the Data Value Show. Today we're going to have a very topical subject to discuss, which is the evolution of the CDO role. And I'm really happy to have Carl Winterbottom from Orbition, I hope I got it right this time, to talk about the topic. Hey Carl, how you doing?
Hi Chris, good to see you again.
And you. So as I always do with an intro, I do a lot of posts on LinkedIn, and one of the topics we were talking about was the reporting line of a CDO, and Kyle added some points. I thought it'd be great to have a chat with him, and we had an offline discussion which we thought was too good not to share our views. So we found a slot for Carl to come on and discuss the evolution of the CDO role. So Carl, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Kyle Winterbottom. I'm the founder and CEO of Orbition Group. I guess we brand ourselves as a talent solutions business that operates exclusively within the data and analytics world. So obviously we are UK headquartered, but we work across the UK, Europe, and out in the US as well. I guess there's two or three very distinct parts to our business. One, what would resemble more an executive search type practice, where we help organizations to identify, assess, and ultimately hire chief data officers and data leaders as a broader term. The middle component of our business is where we help organizations and their CDOs to build their data capabilities, so the technical teams that sit beneath them and around them. And then we have a kind of a talent advisory arm to our business, which helps them to, I guess, pull together different types of talent strategies, and how they're going to go about attracting talent, employer branding, all of that type of good stuff. And obviously I do a lot of this type of stuff, Chris. We have our own podcast. We host a lot of events ourselves and so on and so forth. So,
yeah, we were just discussing before the show that, you've only going about 4 years, but you've made a massive impact in the community. So I think that's, it's always about differentiating yourself. And, there's lots of recruitment companies, and I know you're more than that, a talent company, but to show that you're very plugged into the market and being a thought leader, helping companies to work out, okay, it's great, as we talked about, great having that CDO, but how are you going to use them? What they're going to do to help your company achieve what they want, and which probably goes nicely into this topic, which I think I put on the post, and good old Scott Taylor has it referenced as his chief dog officer. He talks about that after chief dog officer is normally put down after 18 months, and that's sort of been the average tenure to the role, and that's not a good sign if you compare it to the average tenure of a CFO or a CEO of 4 to 5 years. So there's a big difference, and it's probably good. Why do you think that is? Why has that been a short, a high turnover of that role?
I think this conversation is always interesting, right? Because I think there's context plays a massive part here, right? So I think it'd be remiss of us not to talk about. There's obviously been some failings within our industry to get this right. Like fundamentally, that's there's definitely a lot of that's happened for a whole variety of reasons, and I don't think it's fair to say that it's anybody's fault. I think the maturity of the industry in comparison to something more traditional and established like the finance office or the marketing office or whatever the case may be is obviously different, and I think that leads to organizations fundamentally not really understanding what they're looking for or what they need this person for, which fundamentally then leads them down a path which they might appoint the right type of person or, focus on prioritizing the wrong skills and attributes and capabilities. And I think the other part of it is that in most instances, organizations are going and hiring these people because they want to go through some kind of transformation, right? Unless you are Netflix or Amazon, like data isn't your core business, right? And therefore a lot of these, especially larger enterprises, are kind of trying to change the way they work with data analytics, right? So there's kind of an element of innovation, an element of transformation. And I think it's probably also fair to say what you do get with some people and some businesses is, once they go in and establish the foundations and then get a business on the right track and the right trajectory, they then want to go off and do the next transformational type gig.
Yeah.
So I do think, you know, and I've said this publicly many times before, you know, I don't think it'd be a bad thing if as an industry we were to kind of make peace with the fact that we might need to have different iterations of a chief data officer or whoever is leading data in an organization, depending upon what part of the journey they are at. So I think, you know, there's several different things to it, but fundamentally, I think it normally sits in one of those camps.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and one I haven't thought of, and you know, I think it's a reference we're using, having the right people on the bus when you're on your journey of a startup or of a company, and you know, the people that are on the first part of the journey may not be the people you need for the complete journey. So I think if you flip that to obviously CDO being the data industry be a very fast-paced moving technology and environment, that maybe that's it. Is that you've taken a company that's scaled so much that they need someone that's you know, the next sort of like level. So you know, they've maybe helped with the foundation piece, and they maybe need more technical then. You know, that they were more you know, the technical whisperers bridging that gap between the business and the existing development teams. Whereas later on was a better understanding and maybe put in the self-service capabilities or the guardrails, as you like to call them. You know, it's a different beast. Then is that person needs to be more of a salesperson. So yeah, it's an interesting view. So we have to tell Scott Taylor that they don't all get put down. They just go to another nice field, another farm somewhere, which I may have told my children in the younger days when the dog went. But they know now the truth. So that's a very interesting view on it. So and I think the other one is the maturity of that role. So you mentioned is not everyone really knew what they wanted from that CDO, and I think I did a jokey post about it. Is, you know, the CEO said, "Oh, we're going to be data. We're going to monetize our data," and then the CFO going, "Oh, great. You know, what's the strategy?" Is, "I've hired a CDO." Oh, that's your strategy, you know. And so it's that. Oh, they've got one, I've got to have one approach, and which probably leads us neatly maybe into this org structure piece of the conversation. Is, you know, that CEO goes and makes that decision. He goes, right, I'm going to hire a CDO. Where he puts that CDO, and we discuss whether could that influence the ability for them to deliver.
Yes, I personally think so. So I think, you know, there's a lot made about reporting lines, right? And I think the hard facts with it are that in theory, it shouldn't really matter where data sits within an organization. It's fundamentally about the CDO that gets hired, their abilities and capabilities and skill set, etc., and also then the person that they report to, you know, and you get that starts to get you into conversations around, you know, how influential are they in the business, and, you know, do they have a seat at the table, and, you know, what can they do to promote and support and so on and so forth. So, and I think that's right. However, what I do also think is that, you know, from experience of taking CDO mandates to market on behalf of organizations, that we are at a place in time now where a lot of people, you know, if you were to go and say this role sits under the CIO or the CTO as an example, there's a lot of people that are, you know, put off by that quite quickly, because I think they, you know, they view that or perceive that to mean certain things, you know. So people will openly say where a data office sits, whilst it shouldn't matter, it fundamentally tells me a lot about how that business perceives what data is, and therefore the knock-on effect of that is how it will be treated, how it will be invested in, so on and so forth. So again, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to this, and I know we've spoken about this before, right? It's so contextual to an organization, because if you are a product-led business, then it may make the most sense for your, you know, for your CDO office to sit as part of a product or a tech team. So it's a hard one to answer, because I think you can never get that right, no matter what you say, right?
No, and I think this is something we talked about before, and I think Scott Taylor's just joined, so we just did a shout out to Scott, Val, and anyone else listening. But yeah, so we're just talking about your chief dog officer, Scott. But I think the other thing that I think is an element, and you're right, there is no one size fits all, and good job, because that keeps us useful, doesn't it? Otherwise, but it's understanding where the company strategy is another element that I considered, and I think we talked about this before, and I had some views on where I thought the CDO would need to fit to be successful in each of these scenarios, and companies, depending on where your backing is, what your funding is, what your balance sheet is looking at, can have very different approaches. And I use Uber as an example of 11 years until it actually made a profit. They weren't worried about any cost of doing these initiatives, because they were playing the long game. So that was very much a growth mode. And I think the other one, which is the opposite end of the spectrum, really is a company is really focused on making a change this year, because they need to make some cutbacks. Whatever they do needs to make a difference to the bottom line within this fiscal year. I think the only way you're going to get anything decided then is you work for the CFO, or that route there, is because he's not going to sign off anything you want to do. But if you can come with a good enough business case where you save some money this fiscal year, he's going to want to do it. So I think the one in the middle, which again, there's probably different grades of this based on the maturity of the organization. I call it hybrid mode. It's like using optimizations to fund future growth. So creating that CDO could create his own cost center, capability. They're going, look, I've saved you that money. That money, I'm going to reinvest it on some cool stuff, or some stuff that I know you're going to need later. But allow me the autonomy to make that decision. I think that's the key thing. It's autonomy to deliver against the objectives you've been given. But making sure the objectives given are aligned to the whole C-suite may be very different, because So
I mean, personally, I think that's where a lot of the problem stems from, right? So if I was to go back and think how many conversations I've had with a business leader that wanted to hire a chief data analytics officer who had a very clear mandate as to what they were expecting, it'd be very few, right? It's almost like the strategy is, we know we should be doing something, or we know we should be doing more with data, or we've got all of these data issues, let's fix data, or let's get value from data. So it's often a very, very high level, broad topic that underneath it doesn't have a lot of substance. And then the CDO is expected to come in and figure out what that actually means, which I think is why it's, part of the kind of perceived failings is that people get hired based on the perception of what a business or its CEO or whoever's making that decision believes data to be. And often because, data lives in a system, we need some engineering to move it. We need some tools to visualize it. It often gets grouped in with technical type of skills. And then you get into this, to your point earlier about the kind of the sales and marketing ability of someone in certain environments, that is absolutely fundamental to the job, but often they're not the skills that are being assessed. So the whole ability to influence or communicate or tell stories or whatever the case may be often goes amiss, because what they are focusing on is what they think they need to be focusing on. So as far as the mandate goes, they probably hire the right person, right? As far as that job description, it just so happens to be that it's probably the wrong job description that they've created, right? So.
And again, there's probably that sales thing. They need to sell that role to someone for them to come there, even though the role they're going to may not be as good a description as may have been on the job spec, which got them there. Which I suppose it's being able to, and I suppose this is where you help with your people you work with to make sure they ask the right questions, to make sure they're going into a role that that they've. The right skills are actually needed from what they can actually do, rather than relying on things they may not want to do. Which leads us. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
So I was going to say it's a two-way street as well, right? So of course an organization will be trying to position themselves in the best light possible, and there will be organizations that will happily say our data's a mess or it could be better, but actually no one's going to paint a dreadful picture, right? Because fundamentally they're trying to attract great people, right? So there will be an element of rose-tinted glasses for sure, but it works the other way too, right? So often we talked about the tenure a second ago. If someone lands in an organization, I've had it many times where, people will reach out to me and say, I've been here 6 months, I've made a terrible mistake, I might be looking, keep your eye out for me. And, as harsh as this might sound, that's kind of also on them a little bit. Like, I'm sure they've been told a few white lies to get them in there, but fundamentally they probably should have dug a little bit deeper to, ask more pointed questions, which may give them an insight into actually what is going on here. How much do they get it, in quotation marks? How much are they willing to invest? Do they have budgets assigned for all of this kind of growth stuff that they're talking about, and so on and so forth, really? So it can be a very complex and complicated kind of topic to navigate.
Yeah, and you don't want to be jumping around every 6 months. It doesn't look good with not actually starting lots of stuff and never completing things is not a good thing to reference. So, and this is something we've talked about before with people in the past, but roles, skills over roles. Okay, so we talked just before the show of back at the beginning, back in the good old days when I started, we put you put multiple hats on. You didn't call yourself a DBA, you didn't call yourself an ETL developer, you didn't call yourself a report writer, you didn't call yourself the DevOps or your deployment team. It was a small group of people that just got it done. And I think we went a bit too role crazy. So we just got too many roles in there, and boiling it back down to is, okay, what are the skills needed and to achieve the outcome for the role that's being defined? And so what would you, and I know there's gonna be no right, what would you list as the key skills needed, and maybe that maturity scale of a CDO for a company that's at the beginning of its maturity, and a CDO maybe that's coming into a company that's a bit more data mature, further along that line?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's also worth defining what we mean by maturity to a certain extent, right? Because I think, if you're thinking about the tech startup world as an example, you're probably going to need someone who 100% can roll their sleeves up and get stuck in and still code. And, I've made many a joke on LinkedIn about the fact that you get CDO job descriptions that have Python as the number one skill set they're looking for, right? And in the majority of cases, that probably isn't right, but there definitely will be some cases that it is, right? So it depends on, I think, the business, what it does. If it's product led, which I know that we touched upon earlier a little bit. So, and then you start to get into the concept of foundations. What do we mean by foundations? Are we talking here data governance policies or frameworks, which will vary depending upon the organization, the size of the organization, the sector? I know of some very, very large global brands that aren't regulated, that don't have data governance teams or people in them at all, because their stance is, well, we can't get fined, so who cares, right? And obviously their CDO thinks, well, that's just ludicrous. How am I supposed to do great analytics, right? But so I think it depends on the context of the environment. I think, of course, when you get into large enterprise size organizations, the CDO really needs to act like an executive, and I think that's important, right? So I think it depends on the size and scale of the business, what they do, if they're regulated or not. I think there's a whole host of facets to it, but in the majority of cases, I'd probably quote several people that would say something along the lines of be a business leader first, data/technology leader second, and I think that's good advice for the majority of roles out there. Again, I think the challenge often is the people that make the decisions around who are going to hire for these roles often don't know what they want or need, or what they want versus what they need are probably two different things because of that perception, or their lack of knowledge of the industry, or what it should or could potentially do for their business, which then leads you down that garden path where you sometimes have the wrong, the right person against the mandate, but the wrong person for probably what they needed. So yeah, it's almost impossible to say, but I think when you get into that enterprise level, it's more about the business skills. And of course, the way I describe it to a lot of businesses is you've got a spectrum, right? You've got a spectrum from business at one end, technology at the other, and it goes all the way through the data landscape. And then the closer you get to the middle, in theory, should be the best of both worlds, right? But everybody will always lean one way or another. It depends on the size of the business. Even if there were somebody out there that was equally good on the business side as they were the technology and data side, would they have time to do both in equal measure? Probably not. Do they have the appetite to do both in equal measure? Probably not. So I think it's about understanding really what's going to move the dial for that business at that point in time, and focusing in on those, those top 3 to 5 skill sets that will allow them to do that.
It's a really good point, and the fact that, I suppose, if anything, you probably have to have that business is the direction you're going in, where you are on that technical and how far you keep that technical knowledge. But I suppose if you're pursuing a CDO role, at some point the idea is, you want a seat at the table. You want to be able to, but you still want to have enough knowledge and skills to be able to talk and communicate to your data team. So you have that credibility with them, and also you can call them out when they start saying stupid things of like how long it's going to take you to do something. But it's a fine line to tread, because I think pardon the expression, but the longer you're out the trenches, the harder it is to go and get back into them, or to be effective in the trenches as well. It's harder. So,
and I think that's why people end up often getting into a certain type of role and organization, right? It's very seldom that you'd see someone working for, I don't know, a FTSE 100, then all of a sudden they end up at a startup unless they start it, right? It's because it's just a different environment. So in those smaller businesses, absolutely, yes, they will need an element of business focused skills, but they also, it might, at that point in time, might be more important for them to be a technical leader first, and, leave the rest to other people. Whereas as soon as you get into the enterprise world, there's some data and analytics teams and capabilities out there that are kind of 2,000 people strong, right? At that point in time, really, you should be in the business, for want of a better phrase, like figuring out how you get the most value out of working with each department, and how all of that aids the strategy that they're trying to drive, at a functional unit level, I guess.
No, I'm just thinking about sort of like the things you could, CDO could be effective doing, and rather than you say just being fixed on one new transformation, new project, but it's looking at where you can optimize existing ways of working, reducing friction. But it's all that sales and marketing. Is you got to sell the art of the possible, and I know that's something that I've talked to Scott Taylor about. Is that you need to have that sales, marketing, create that FOMO between the other departments, because the approach of saying, we're going to do your data for you, oh, and that's all right, we don't need it, we're all right with our Excel and the rest of it. But for the other department to say, oh, well, when they did that for us, look at all these benefits we got, and we want a bit of that, and that's the only way we're gonna accelerate that stuff. Another thing I thought was that, and maybe this is something I'm sure you do, is that companies should really say, am I ready for a CDO? Are we CDO prepared? And I'm sure that's part of what the service you provide. But that's wake up call to an organization and say, you don't really need a CDO at this point. You need these skills, which you can get maybe in the team. You obviously want to upsell in a new role, but someone that's got those got the skills you need at that point in time, and then a route maybe when's the right time, and before you do that, work out how it's going to sit on the board and the responsibilities, and have the job spec agreed with all the other people in the board, because you don't want to come into I've been wheeled into a new job before where I couldn't give my title because they hadn't communicated that the people that are going to that applied for it, I got it, and that's not a place you want to go into. So, having everyone having that clear understanding of what you're doing is key. So right, so I think let's talk about this. We talked about the AI chief product officer, chief AI officer. We want to move to this more data product delivery away, and we're promoting self-serve and creating foundations that people can. We help with creating foundations for people that can have data product teams that can deliver that. But if we're moving to this new product route, and all of these data products are reporting to a CPO, a Chief Product Officer, I did a blog. Well, actually, my friend and I did a blog which we worked on together, which was about wrapping as a service. So wrapping data into part of the product you have. To do that, your data team needs to be embedded within that product team. So if we're moving to that more product-led and AI is part of that product, so should we be moving towards should we give it a fancy title, a Chief Product Data AI Officer, a CBDAI or something like that? But is that the direction you think we may be going?
Well, I think we're definitely going towards a product way of working. I think largely that's been quite heavily adopted now. I think like a lot of things in our industry, titles included, the complete lack of standardization around what titles mean in different organizations, are, in all honesty, they're pretty wild, right? We could line 10 CDOs up in front of us now, and they would be, have very different skill sets on wildly different money. You might have some people that are senior managers in one business that have bigger teams and are on more money than a CDO in another business. So I think titles and the lack of standardization around titles and definitions is a little bit problematic. So almost everything needs to be based on merits of that business. I think the product thing is interesting because I think we're definitely moving there. But again, back to my earlier point, like what actually is product and how is that defined in a business? I see many businesses now that say, we're hiring data product owners or they're calling them that. And you look at it and you're like, that's basically a business analyst, right? That they're acting as the bridge between
or the
technical
the Scrum Master or
they're going requirement gathering and they're taking that back and saying, here's what we need to build, here's what it needs to have, versus then other people that are doing true data product or data as a product or whatever kind of terminology we're using, where it's being maintained, and they're starting to then talk about, well, what's the life cycle of this as a product? Do we need to sunset it at some point? So traditional product ways of thinking and product management principles are being embedded into it. So I think it really depends on that, and then again probably back to maturity around how product-led a business is to start with, right? I think the AI piece, I think the chief data officer is probably got more of affinity to AI because obviously good AI needs good data, right? Yep. And I know of, we host a lot of events. We had an event last month, and there were some people that told me while I was there that basically said, it almost feels a little bit like a land grab moment. And some people have recently joined new organizations who part of their negotiation was that they wanted to have AI in the title. So it was Chief Data and AI Officer, because they feel that if that goes to somebody else, then where does that leave them on this kind of trajectory that we're on, right? And obviously AI is all the hype, probably similar with the CDO role itself several years back, right? Once you've got the title, rightly or wrongly, you're in the vicinity then of when these new and bigger jobs start coming up, which I don't think it'll be long before, you're starting to get chief data and AI officers becoming more and more of a thing, or chief AI officers on their own.
It bleeds nicely
on already started.
To a comment from Scott, so are we finding any pushbacks expanding titles? So yeah, CDO AIO, you, sometimes YO. So are you seeing the growth in these titles now? Have we gone past the three letter original limit now into more elaborate
obviously ones? I think the CDAO is kind of where it stopped, but you've effectively got the CDA AIO, right? So Chief Data Analytics or an AI Officer. But yeah, I mean, look, I think in all honesty, it's much of a muchness. Like I think, back to it's ironic, right? Because we're talking about data teams needing to market themselves better, and fundamentally, that's what this is, right? It's a giant marketing exercise on usually on a personal level. I mean, it's important, don't get me wrong, but broadly speaking, whether you've got the CDO title or the CDAO title or the CDAAIO title, broadly speaking, it's you look after data analytics and artificial intelligence, which even people that have just got a CDO title, they do that, right? So I think it depends on really how aids up people are about having titles that have the latest buzzwords. But that said, I think it's probably a smart move to kind of have the association.
Yeah, I mean, I could change mine. I have the ability to, but I've just kept it with 3 for now. But I have joked in the past. I call myself Chief Get Shit Done Officer, but that wasn't probably an acceptable thing to have on my footer. Yeah, so interesting that I think that land grab approach you mentioned of like, I know we're not doing AI yet, but I want it when it comes along. So it's gonna be mine. And again, the title doesn't mean, as long as that's clearly defined in your job spec, I think that's all that really matters. This whole, the chief information officer, information data, it's semantics to some degree. And if you see them under posts about disagreements of what the difference between data, information, knowledge, and wisdom, of where it fits in and where it begins. I've been sucked into these debates and I've used it as well. But we are to is the next one is a chief wisdom officer. I think I've joked in the past is above the chief knowledge officer. Where does it stop? But I think, as I think Ramona should put on here, is that we just need to have clear responsibility. Definitely, I like a good old racy. What am I responsible for? What am I accountable for? What am I contributing for? And who do I need to inform? Or to get have a clear of any other C-suites on there where I do that. Do I have my own budget? What are the company's objectives? You're in growth mode, and I think then don't matter about the title. You're in an environment that you've been set up to succeed. So
I'd agree with that. I think as I said before, we'll fill jobs. There might be a head of or a director role that has a bigger role, remit, responsibility, accountability, budget, etc. than the next role will fill, which has a CDO title, right? Don't get me wrong. I think there is clamour for the title, and probably for good reason, right? As I said before, because once you have the title and you've operated at a certain level, irrespective of what the reality is, the next organization that comes along that's looking for a chief data officer or any of the acronyms we've talked about, then you're automatically in the mix, right? Because you've had the title. But sometimes, we're working on some mandates now where it's a CDO role, and they fully realize actually what we probably don't need because of where we're at on our journey. We probably don't need someone that's been there and done that. We probably need someone that's ready to take
that next step
up, right? And I think it's just about helping organizations really understand, like, where are you at, what do you need, and what skills are going to help you get from A to B, right? Because that's fundamentally at this point in time the biggest thing that you can do to help yourself and whoever you hire to be successful. I think there's often a lot of focus on, well, in 5 years we want to be doing this, and it's like, well, in 5 years a lot of businesses want to be doing a lot of things. 5 years ago they want to be doing that too, and they're still not. So
in 10 years they want to do Hadoop. They don't want any more. So you need to make sure that you're going the right direction as well. So I think, good comment from Veronica, and I think, people looking for unicorns. 50% technology, 50% business planners, and 50% sales at maths, and obviously 0% in mathematics. So in fact, we've got another comment from Chris. Okay. So maybe that's the exception for you, Russell. You can keep your chief.
I think the whole thing with the CIO is it's a fascinating conversation, right? Because I think the CIO, for whatever reason, and I don't know the heritage of that, probably all that well, but that fundamentally now has become an IT thing, right? Information and technology, and sometimes it was split or sometimes it wasn't. But if you read the title, there's in theory no reason why that shouldn't be or could be the same job, and in some businesses it is actually, right? And I think part of the feedback we got when we did one of our recent roundtables where we talked about the future of the CDO role was that there was probably, there's been a lot of high profile businesses that have at one point in time made the decision to move their CDO or chief data office from under the CIO into the business, in quotation marks, wherever that may be, whether it's transformation or strategy or commercial or finance or yada, yada, yada. And then for whatever reason recently have reversed that decision, cut the scope of the CDO, maybe removed them altogether, put all of the technical people from a data perspective back under the CIO, and then they're back where they started several years ago. And, we got into the discussion of why that's happening. And it was like, well, because fundamentally a lot of, we talked about building the foundations. So people are going in, building the platforms, doing all of this type of stuff. And if they're not getting to the point of demonstrating some value, and again,
business value, my favorite comment,
value, right? But if you're not getting to the point of delivering it, which I think that is unfortunately a lot of the experiences of many kind of CEOs would be, we've paid a lot of money, and what to them, due to their lack of knowledge, is we've got two people who seem to be building technology for us. Like maybe the CIO can just do that. And I think it's about splitting that out. And there's a lot of people that, claim that, well, let's have the chief data officer as the people that are using data to drive value, and let the CIO or the CTO to worry about the tech. And I've had many people on our podcast who would say, living in or under tech is probably the easiest place to get stuff done. But it's probably the worst place to
actually get the right stuff done for the business.
You
might build the platform, but you may not get the tenants for the platform. And an interesting point, and the history of the CIO role and CDO role, and how I've seen, I suppose, over the years is when analytics, or BI as it was just called back then, was run out of the business. It was like shadow IT. They cobbled together budgets to do stuff, but then gradually it was being IT got involved a little bit more. But the CIO was looking after all the operational systems, so the creation of the data, rather than directly the analytics, maybe operational sort of stuff, but never the analytics that was then, batch overnight, decisions made. And, gradually those two things have been coming together more. So you now have, with that role of the CDO role coming along, but it was still very much us, them, operational systems, DevOps, data systems, data ops, the connection between the two loose still. With the move to decisions being made in operational activities based on analytics that's being created, the world's becoming much more blurred. That whereas before maybe you could say, all right, CEO, you do this. All right, CDO, I'm doing this. If you're now trying to make data-driven decisions and automation within your organization, I don't think the two roles can exist together. I don't think that there's a place for both of them. So I think that's it. And your point about reporting to CTO, I think that's probably where they have been able to is a guy, CTO or someone in that role had probably the good technical skills, the good cloud skills. They didn't have that data piece, so they get someone in, and it's probably an easy separation of activities, but then you're too distant away from the business. You're not plugged into what they actually need, and that's the biggest gap that we've had and need to close. And if anything, that the CDO role, I'd love to see for the future, is that CDO role needs to be I think I've joked about it, stalactites and stalagmites. The CDO role needs to be the person that joins up, your business and your technology 100%. From a data perspective.
I agree with that, definitely.
So that's I might get a mem for that one out later, but I think that's I'd like to see the direction. We got a question up here as well. Oh, okay, well, this is something we've covered a little bit. I'm not sure who this one is actually, because I've got to. It's Mark Venn. There you go. Hey, Mark. Who does the CDO typically report to in your experience? Direct report and dotted lines?
It's normally the CIO, I'd say, in the large majority of cases. As I said, there's been some high-profile moves out of CIO into a business function. A lot of those decisions have been reversed. I think there's been 5 or 6 here in the UK, fairly high-profile businesses that have made that decision this year. So yeah, I think broadly, and I think again that just comes back to the perception of what non-data people, that are making these decisions, like the CEO or whoever is making the decision at the top table. I think they struggle to separate data and technology. They'll talk about making better decisions, but fundamentally, when it comes to it, they think that the role is one of technicality. It's something to do with systems, and it's something to do with needing engineering to move data, and as I said before, tools to visualize it, and platforms for it to have a single source of truth. And so you just end up back at this place of data and IT are just together, and therefore they think that's the most logical place to house it.
It leads to a really, really interesting point, really, is that that CEOs we've had, or the ones that are on the boards at the moment, is there a change maybe that will happen over time, that these CEOs, probably people don't leave, as you say, they don't leave out those jobs very often. They're normally paid very well, so they're probably I'm not saying the old boys club, but they're probably the same people are being swapped around to some degree. And when there's going to be a time when the next breed, the next batch, the next level of maybe that come from different career paths, different routes. And I think I did some research on this. Is most CEOs have always come from the CFO. Sometimes it is a natural route for a go, or it's always sales. So they're the two routes that they've both gone. So CEOs always understand sales and marketing to some degree, and they always understand finance because that's been the world they live in. Legal, they probably know them, but just don't get annoyed by them from either of those roles. But they understand, what the lead. But anything outside of the C titles that cover those, it's never something they would have ever had hands-on experience or knowledge on from their career path. They would have been too far away from it. And the companies that have had CDOs, get reported. There's two examples I got. So Starbucks, so the CDO officer became the CEO. I think I've got the name right, Adam Brotman, I think. And another one was General Electric. So former CDO became the General Electric CEO. So, and I remember doing this research. I couldn't find many more. So if anyone knows loads of other examples where CDOs have got that seat at the top table. So I suppose the question I've got is, do we see that CDO role? Let's bundle it in with the A as well. It covers that as well, but based for the purpose of moving forward. Do you ever see that having a top seat at the table, reporting to the CEO?
I mean, it has done, right? So that there are instances where the CDO will report to the CEO. I mean, those instances are few and far between in comparison to the amount of CDOs there are out there and where they're reporting to, right? But they're definitely out there and have been there. I think that's almost seen as the holy grail, right? For obvious reasons, and you'll hear many people in our industry say, you can't really be a chief if you report to another chief that isn't the main chief.
Yeah.
Again,
little chief.
Yeah. This. I'm sure there's an argument in there for that, but yeah, most don't, and therefore you get into, well, is it really a CDO role or not? And again, it's contextual, right? It's what is the role, what is the scope, what is the responsibility, accountability, budget, yada yada yada. I think it's interesting because I think we've probably gone backwards in my view, even from a couple of years ago. I think there was this narrative forming that eventually every business was going to be a data-driven Goliath, and therefore the CDO would report to the CEO, and one day the CDO would become the future CEO, and so on and so forth.
It's what we wanted. It was like our data bubble we live in. One day we'll have a seat at the table. We'll be listened to.
Yeah, and I mean, look, there's been some fairly high-profile, CDOs that have moved into like a COO role. So there's a big argument for that, given how, especially businesses that are maturing in that journey, that data will become a mainstay of their operation.
Operation efficiencies is probably the main monetization channel for data. I mean, the other two, wrapping, as I referred to earlier, and then selling your data, they're less likely that you'll less likely that most companies will need. But optimizing with data, it's where the real money is. It's where the real savings are. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, right, as well, because part of the interview process often is geared around these companies. As I said, they often don't know what they don't know, right? And they can take some advice from someone like me, but actually it's often more powerful when they hear it from people they're speaking to. So, for example, there's a FTSE 100 that we helped to kind of find a CDO role, and this business were kind of hell bent on the fact that they had this really unique data set that they thought they could sell. And I was like, yeah, you do. You could sell it if that's the strategy that you want, but you will definitely, given the size of your business, you will definitely, benefit more in terms of top and bottom line from using data than you will selling it. But it took 2 or 3 people who had gone, so part of that mandate was, we need somebody that has, built and sold data as a product, monetized it in terms of selling the data set. So I went, and I knew full well what had happened. We'd bring someone in, they'd have a conversation, they'd inform them that actually, yes, it's possible to do this, but they'd be better off doing something else or focusing their time and money in other places. And then lo and behold, it's actually, okay, yeah, maybe we need to change the mandate slightly. So, and I think the process can be a two-way street sometimes. And often what you do find at this level when companies are hiring is because they don't really know what they want and they don't know what they don't know. It sometimes takes them to speak to a few people to realize, okay, actually, maybe, not as much of that as we thought, and maybe a little bit more of this, or maybe this is where the skill gap is, or, whatever the case may be. So I think the other interesting point is there's a lot of conversation around, as the CEOs of today go off and enjoy their nice retirement, they were going to have a future generation that have been brought up in a digital and data-led world, right? So, and I think that's been evidenced by, if you think about the makeup of non-exec teams for most businesses, it's, normally someone from finance, someone from legal, someone from an operational and a sales background, marketing, maybe, so on and so forth. There are definitely more non-exec type roles for CDOs now. So we're seeing a lot of that. And I think, that's a good sign, because they are, even if they don't have a CDO, they are getting people that have been a CDO elsewhere in to help them and advise them, which I think is only going to be a good thing. So yeah, who knows? Maybe one day, we have a future generation where the CEO of big business came from, being a data analyst or something like that.
Yeah, and I think mate, I suppose I'm going to contradict myself here. I'm going to argue myself, because we've been too agreeable through this podcast. But I think it's quite clear to understand the other C-suites. Okay, marketing, I do marketing. Finance, I do the books. Chief legal, we run after. We make sure you don't get sued. It's clearly understood each of those domains, and data crosses those domains. So it isn't. It isn't. I suppose maybe having that dotted line to the CEO is something that needs going on. Is having a seat at the table, even though you're maybe a capability that's there, and maybe where that product role came into it as well. Is if you're a product-led organization, data should be part of that product, I think. And having, it goes back down to skills. We go around in circles here. Is that you need a certain amount of skill to deliver what you need to deliver, and as you get time, those skills may change. And I suppose focus on the skills, not the roles, would be the output from this.
100%. Yeah, I think it's I find it interesting, because if you were to go and ask anybody in the data analytics world, they would tell you, start with the business strategy and work backwards, right? What do they want to achieve? Okay, what does that actually mean in terms of deliverables? Okay, what solutions do we need to build? What, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, in reality, that almost never happens, right? Or it very rarely happens, not that simplified, at least.
Yeah.
So then you sit here and wonder, why? right? And I think it's because often a lot of businesses are going to market. You know, there's definitely been a big hype cycle around this, you know, as with any role that, you know, that comes up, right? You know, so
over promise and under delivered for a while. That's
yeah. But I mean, look, if you know, if you're a big, I think sometimes because I've just always wondered, like, why are they doing this? Because there's many businesses that I know of that have gone and hired someone. They've built this massive team. They've spent a shed load of money, right?
Yep.
And I know from the people on the inside of that business that the powers that be at the top couldn't care less. Like they don't really want to be doing it, or they don't buy into it, or whatever the case may be. But often the perception needs to be there. Like it's so detrimental to look like you're not doing anything that you have to spend money on a cause that you maybe don't even believe in, right?
Yeah, and I've had little rants about this in the past, and that's because maybe I've had a foot on both sides. Is that, you know, technology people like building stuff, you like engineering stuff, and sometimes you don't know what you're not connected to. I joked around this, we should be taught basic profit and loss accounts and balance sheets, but it's just having that cost awareness of we're doing this because we're running a business. And great, you can go and automate this thing here, but I only do it once a month. This thing I do 5 times a day. I want to automate that, and there's a product that can do it for me. Can you implement that? And so it goes back to having the right people that you need. And I think we need more problem solvers out there rather than and actually knowing the problem they're solving. And that only comes with transparency of why we're all doing this in an organization. So I've always been talking about business value for a while, and something I've been working on in the background is business value is an evidenceable positive effects on your company's performance or objectives. And it's that evidence word that we haven't done very well. And I think if we are able to focus on optimizations for business, and any CDO out there, if you're going in there, the first thing you're trying to do, rather than build a nice new shiny platform, go and look to see what you can optimize, improve, reduce the friction on very, very quickly, to actually, without building a whole new platform. That's going to be more effective than you trying to define your new target architecture and trying to go and get budget for it. So focus on real world problems.
We talked earlier, right, about the tenure of the CDO, and the reality is of to kind of execute on a data strategy is like a full transformational program of like 3 to 5 years, right? So something's amiss somewhere, obviously, right? And I think to your point, I don't know whether the whole P&L thing. I mean, I think it'll be a benefit to anybody, right, who's operating in a commercial leadership role to understand the basics at least. But again, back to my point earlier, often the mandate for the people that they're bringing in is build as a platform. The amount of times the strategy is, we know we need to be doing more or something with data. Well, let's go and hire someone. Okay, we're going to need a platform, so let's get someone that can build a platform for us, and then we'll figure it out along the way. And then before you know it, you kind of 2 years in, you spent a load of money on this platform and the team that are delivering it, and then it's kind of like, well, what are we getting from this? And it's like, well, not a lot, because you've not even put it to use yet, right? So
exactly, I'm a big supporter of incremental value, delivering often and maturing those capabilities. And it's not only your technical capabilities, it's also the business. You can have the most mature technical capabilities out there, but if the business is still dragging their heels, there's no point going fast than them. You need to travel at the same speed of the business and doing what you can to make the business want to move quicker. So that's
100%. And I think that's a skill set in of itself, right? A skill set that often is underappreciated, undervalued, and businesses fundamentally don't look for, because again, back to that perception piece, they don't realize that that's going to be an integral part of getting the business to make decisions with data that drives value, right? So
exactly. All right. Well, anyway, we got approaching up to I got maybe one more comment. Ramona's given a comment on this feature product platform. I think we should it's product-based mentality. You're building features. Everything's a feature. There are some features are capabilities. Some features are deliverables. Features. So I think it's one more thing I was going to bring up, and it's a bit of a an observation that what I'd seen out there is, CDOs come and go, and unfortunately up until now, it doesn't really have an effect in the market with regard to, share price and the organization. It never normally makes it to the front page unless there's been a breach or something like that. And, to give a comparison to a CEO leaving, NatWest value went down by 850 million. And after quitting that particular role. So I don't think the profile yet in an organization that CDOs are mission critical organization, but I'd like to think that will change over time. I think providing competitive advantage with data is going to make your company more valuable. And I think if you start seeing some clever people are out there that have gone and made companies very data driven very quickly, and they move, I think that the perception of them going would have a maybe a negative consequence in the future. But
100% agree with that. I think the profile of the CDO, broadly speaking, back to our point about the whole sales and marketing piece, that needs to happen internally within organizations to deliver and execute, but also as an industry, we probably need to do be better at being in the right rooms. And I think fundamentally, I know me and you, Chris, are both very active on LinkedIn, and we do stuff like this, and we host events and yada yada yada, which is great. And it's
not enough. We need more people to talk about it.
I mean, look, we do what we do to help share knowledge, ideas, use case experience, what works, what's not, and elevate the industry. Yeah. But fundamentally, often, like places like LinkedIn are an echo chamber, right? Because we all stand there and we either fiercely disagree and have different point of view, or we're high-fiving each other and saying, yeah, that's absolutely right. But the people that we need to be having these conversations with are fundamentally the CEOs that have and make these decisions inside organizations. And until we can find a way to do that in a more scalable, sustainable way, I think it'll always be a little bit of a struggle based on the historic perception of what data has been. But again, there's a reason that businesses and their CEOs are continuing to invest in this, because there's been a number of high profile use cases where a business has done something really cool and it's impacted the business in a very positive way, financially or otherwise, right? So I don't know. I don't think it's going anywhere. I think there's work to be done to kind of promote it more. I think is probably what's needed.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. We need to get these stories and actually deliver the message in the right way that CEOs can understand this stuff, and less technical jargon. More clarity in business language. Which I suppose leads me on to we've organised the Winter Data Conference. It was previously called SKID. So maybe I should invite lots of CEOs to that as well, because you can combine your knowledge of data and also a little bit of skiing the day after. But that's my shameless plug. But Carl, if anyone wants to get hold of you, what's you up to next? How can they keep in touch?
LinkedIn is probably the best and easiest way. So please feel free to connect with me if you're not already. We, ton of stuff that's going on over at our business in terms of stuff like this, and interviewing and speaking to industry leaders. So if you're interested in that stuff, then feel free to connect. Cool,
brilliant. And I know you run a podcast as well, so highly recommend anyone that found this one useful on this topic. Check out Carl's backlog. All right, well, I think we're nearly on the hour. I'm not sure that. That was. We got some nice comments. So thank you everyone listening. Shout out to anyone that I haven't mentioned: Stephen, Ramona, Scott Taylor, Russell Willis, Val, Veronica, Mohammed, and anyone else I've missed. Sorry, I nearly froze then. I'm not sure who's on next week, so I haven't actually got the update for next week. We had a movement of calendar, so I think we'll go ahead, but we may have a last minute guest. But Carl, thank you very much for your time. Really enjoyed the chat. I've got some interesting thoughts and I learned some new things today as well. So thanks again for your time.
Nice. Thanks for having me, Chris. Appreciate it.
No worries at all. All right, we'll call it a wrap. So see you everyone.